Jeremy Plymell, AEP 867, assignment number 5. Okay, so first I'm going to do a project overview. The overall goal was students were going to develop a presentation to share with the class in groups of 3 or 4 using primary and secondary sources, and the topic was pretty much up to them what they wanted to do. Um, I For this assignment, I used 4 activities that would be one of the first ones you perform in the classroom, but the project is going to be 4 to 6 weeks long, and I didn't have time to upload every activity. Also, since I'm not actually teaching right now, I talk about the fake audience would be middle school students, and the real audience was my wife and also my brother. So the activity overviews, you have activity 1, which uses a podcast, and the students listen to that and develop skills for primary source gathering. Activity 2, using those skills that they gathered in activity 1, they conduct an interview with a partner and develop a primary source. Activity 3 was a pretty big activity, but it involves talking about how secondary sources, a good secondary source, can be better than a primary source if the person compiles a lot of primary sources to develop a secondary source. And then activity 4 was how we pick topics and organize groups. So to answer the questions put out by this assignment, I went ahead and made a slide, and I'm just going to talk about stuff in general. So does the task lead to understanding? In general, yes, the activities 1 through 3 allow for plenty evidence of understanding. More specifically, though, if you look at activity 2, students were able to show understanding by gathering skills they used in activity 1. So in activity 1, they listened to a podcast that showed them techniques for how to interview people. And so then what I got to see is, did they understand that? Because then in activity 2, they had to use those skills to interview a classmate. Activity 3 shows understanding of secondary and primary source interactions. So in activity 3, I performed a series of actions in front of the class, and the students had to, after, they didn't know this was happening, but afterwards they had to write down what they saw. And so what you'd have is a whole bunch of primary sources that kind of have conflicting information, but if you compile them, you can kind of get a full picture of what's going on, and then you develop a secondary source. So in some cases, secondary sources are better than primary sources. And then the final project that the students would complete compiles evidence of understanding of all goals and objectives that I proposed. So are these tasks for the real world? Absolutely. So there were interview techniques that we used. In the real world, you always have to evaluate information that you're receiving. So that's one of the goals that we're talking about. Finding proper resources is another thing that you're going to have to do all the time. And then sharing information with others. Pretty much in any job you have, you're going to have to share information with others and work as a team. So the variety of assessments, I talk about 2 things here: informal assessments and formal assessments. The informal assessments were conducted during the activities for the purpose of this assignment. So I was able to, or theoretically would have been able to walk around and listen to students using those interview techniques. And also with my brother and my wife, I was standing right there, so I could see exactly what they were doing. Formal assessments was not done necessarily inside of this activity, but as for the project that I presented, you would be able to see what goals they used, and then so they can have um, a variety of choice on how they want to present their information to the class in the groups. So the formal assessment that the students would be presenting in their project was pretty much up to them on how they wanted to present the information. So is this a self-assessment? Well, yes, in a way it is. The final project that was proposed was pretty much one big self-assessment. They would be able to use information gathered from the previous classes and develop a presentation that was using primary and secondary sources. And this ties really well into the ISTE Education 7A, which provide alternative ways for students to demonstrate competency and reflect using technology, since they were able to pretty much use whatever way they wanted. All right, so the revisions, I just covered a little bit from each one. Revision 4 overall, I didn't even talk very much about activity 4. It's not very useful for this assignment, and if I was going to do this assignment specifically again, I wouldn't even have added revision 4 or activity 4. I would have just done a different activity. Activity 3, I needed to clarify prior to having the students write down what they saw me doing. I need to clarify, make sure to talk about what order I'm doing the actions, not necessarily just what actions I did, but what order they happened in. In activity 1, when they were listening to the podcast, I should have paused at certain points because it's kind of difficult for them to listen and write at the same time with a lot going on because the podcast moves pretty quick. And activity 2, I think I would have, came up with a list of questions also that they could ask or that they should ask because some of them I think are going to have a little more difficulty coming up with really good questions. And my reference are right here. A little over time, but it's okay. All right, thank you very much.